inside one of the last hospitals in Gaza. When their universities were destroyed, these medical students became volunteer frontline doctors at Gaza European Hospital. On June 6th, the Rahma Worldwide International Medical Delegation arrived at Gaza European Hospital in Khan Yunis. The humanitarian volunteers noticed something immediately. Some of the medical staff welcoming them with the best food available appeared remarkably young to be doctors. Before the delegation could ask any questions, an airstrike hit the neighborhood. The walls of Gaza European Hospital, one of the only functioning medical centers in the region, shook. Dr. Mustafa, an emergency specialist from Australia, said within the first 15 minutes that we were here, 9 people came in an ambulance already dead. The doctors learned that this was typical for the day-to-day life in Gaza. It was only later the international doctors would come to find out that many of the staff were not fully credentialed doctors but student volunteers. Dr. Bing Lee, another member of the Rahma delegation, a team of 12 doctors from different countries who was there to provide support to Gaza's depleted health system, estimated that half of the people working in European Hospital's emergency department in June were students or trainees from Gaza's 2 medical schools. An anesthesiologist, Salman Dasti, who worked in the Gazan hospitals both before and during this war, said that the healthcare system is on the verge of collapsing and it's being propped up because of students. Mustafa found that students' ability to keep the hospital functioning remarkable. He recalled saying, "We were getting patients moving and getting them treated. It was pretty amazing to see, especially since you can see how broken they are physically and emotionally." On the first day, Lee recalled meeting one of the volunteers keeping Gaza's hospitals running. A patient was brought in and losing blood quickly from a blast injury to his leg. Lee worked with a volunteer to stabilize the man. The volunteer then pulled Lee aside and introduced herself excitedly in English. Her name was Nermeen Zeyad Abu Mustafa and she was only 20 years old. Lee said that he had this impression she was this very friendly person, and she asked him if he wanted help with translation and seeing other patients. The foreign doctor of course appreciated the aid. Earlier the day, Lee, an emergency specialist from Arizona, had already had a heartbreaking experience. She said, "We evaluated one patient that was maybe 3 or 4 years old. Half his head was basically blown off. It ended up being just one of the many similar cases." Lee said other doctors who have returned from Gaza say the Israeli military regularly targets children. As Nermeen showed Lee around, another doctor noticed who the American was talking to and pulled her aside. Lee was told Nermeen had a friend die earlier this same day in the blast that sent a raft of critically injured patients to the hospital. Lee remembered she was keeping this brave face despite learning that she lost someone. Nermeen always wanted to become a doctor. As a young child, she said she had doctor's tools in the form of toys. As she grew older, she watched medical school graduation videos online, transfixed by the celebrations. She imagined herself as a cardiovascular specialist or perhaps a pediatrician. She was overjoyed when, in 2021, she was finally able to enroll at her dream school, Al-Azhar University in Gaza. By October 7, 2023, Nermeen had made it through 2.5 years of medical school. In Gaza, students' medical training starts immediately after high school when they begin a 6-year program of study. And the hour-long bus ride to school from her home in Absan al-Kabira, a small city east of Khan Yunis, made her carsick, but she was happy to be learning. Then, the war came. In early November, Israeli warplanes destroyed Nermeen's campus. By mid-January, Israeli bombardment had reduced every university in Gaza to rubble. Nermeen moved constantly. She evacuated from place to place 4 times in the first 6 months of the war. 84% of Gaza is now under evacuation order. She watched classmates, professors and friends die nearly every week. She said, "In this war, I lost many of my colleagues and friends from school. I lost 4 members of my family." In April, Nermeen started volunteering at the hospital. She said it was the one positive amid all of this. A third-year student would not ordinarily be actively treating patients, but her clinical phase began early. She said, "I was learning from the doctors and helping them." Many of those working and volunteering at the hospital had shifts lasting 24 hours, and no one I spoke with had received payment from the hospital since October. Anything shorter than a 24-hour shift would mean more trips on treacherous roads, made nearly impossible by millions of pounds of debris and sewage overflows from broken sanitation systems. On a normal day, Nermeen began her shift early in the morning, connecting to the internet and trying to download lectures and readings from the website of her bombed university before beginning to see the injured, standing with doctors, talking to patients. As a volunteer, she cleaned wounds, translated for foreign doctors, and made treatment plans. She said there were days when the work was a lot due to the arrival of large numbers of martyrs and injured. But the thing she loved to do most was stitches in the emergency department. ER Dr. Mustafa from Australia recalled that the sutures in Gaza hospitals were labelled not for use on humans. Still, he helped Nermeen with her suture technique. He noticed that she was particularly careful in caring for patients during the process. Nermeen did her best to stitch in a way that would minimize scarring. Conditions were hard. There were no beds, only rigid metal frames. Rooms were cramped and hot. Even the chairs in the hospital were occupied by patients, leaving little room for their caregivers to rest. The complex smelled of rot, and flies landed in patients' wounds just as Nermeen finished disinfecting them. Even the suture needle was less sharp than it should be. Mustafa said it would take you maybe 3-4 attempts to pierce the skin with suture. And you can imagine trying to do that with very limited anesthetic on children as well. Beyond the shortage of goods, there is also a shortage of personnel. Students did their best to fill in. One 22-year-old student who spoke to Mother Jones, Hassan Ali Abu Ghalioun, was in his 3rd year of dental school before the war. He was initially told he'd be working as a porter, then a translator. He spent 4 months volunteering at European hospital, unable to see his family in Deir al-Balah after the Israeli army took over the area between the hospital and his family's tent. He said, "I slept in the office of the International Committee of the Red Cross at the hospital for 4 months. There is a broken bed that does not move from its place, which was not used except for emergencies. When it was unoccupied by patients and when he wasn't being called to translate for a surgeon in the middle of the night, he got that bed." As he spent more time in the hospital, he learned there was a severe shortage of dentists specializing in maxillofacial surgery, so he quickly found himself assisting with those surgeries too. He said it is difficult to talk to patients with burns or fractures, some of whom lost a loved one with the same injury minutes before. Sometimes, the patients the students cared for were people they recognized. On the mid-June day when Nermeen met Bing Lee, she wasn't supposed to be at work. She was at her family's tent, taking a rest day, when she felt a bomb detonate nearby. She and her family saw the smoke of the bombing and a large number of ambulances. Without internet access, Nermeen worried her own relatives might be among the dead. Nermeen decided to go to the hospital on her day off. She said, "I put on the uniform and walked to the road. A man with a car offered her a ride when he saw her medical uniform. His family lived in the area that had just been bombed, and he was headed to the hospital too. Once there, she opened her phone to scroll through the names of the dead. She thought, my friend's name was among the names of the martyrs of this massacre. She rushed to the emergency room in hopes that the news was wrong, but it was true. Most of her friend's family had been killed. She found her friend's younger sister, Samar, waiting alone, with wounds all over her body. Nermeen monitored her vital signs, stitched up a deep gash in her left foot, and patched up 2 wounds on her leg. Samar was later transferred to a different department where her head wounds were treated. Then, Samar was discharged, but she was still in a state of shock and would not speak. At the end of July, Nermeen received word that Samar had been killed too. she joined the rest of her family. Gaza's medical system has been painfully constricted for decades. This is partially due to the long-standing Israeli policy of blocking dual-use items at the border, medical devices that could allegedly be used as weapons. Those items have included crutches, hearing aid batteries, thermometers, and incubators. This means the doctors of Gaza must make do. Dusty, the anesthesiologist from San Francisco, visited Gaza multiple times as part of a medical mission group with the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund before 2023. He said he was fairly impressed with the robustness of the healthcare system, though it still lacked resources, but he was really impressed with the training that the physicians had there. There were 36 fully functioning hospitals in Gaza prior to the war. According to the World Health Organization, by mid-August, only 16 of those 36 hospitals were even partially operational. These 16 hospitals have treated patients far beyond their capacity. The UN Human Rights Office reported that staff is low. More than 500 medical workers have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. And an NBC News investigation recently suggested Israel has targeted doctors for kidnapping and taken them to torture camps. Hanan Belkhi, Eastern Mediterranean Regional Director for the World Health Organization, said that as of early August, the World Health Organization has been able to verify more than 500 attacks on medical personnel in Gaza. This leaves a staggering hole for those in need of care. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly 93,000 people in Gaza are injured. Among those 16 remaining hospitals, there are fewer than 1,500 hospital beds, about 1 for every 60 injured people. And those numbers don't count for those who would ordinarily require hospital beds even in peacetime. Dusty said the remaining students are now basically frontline doctors because of just the lack of personnel. Students spent their days at European hospital functioning as essentially an attending physician while not getting paid and working long arduous hours with little sleep. Nermeen and her classmates dream of continuing their education, perhaps leaving and studying elsewhere if the borders reopen. But as Belkhi said, it is a race against time and circumstance. Conditions in Gaza, meanwhile, are only worsening. The World Health Organization confirmed the first case of polio in Gaza in 25 years on August 22nd. 45 international doctors who spent time in Gaza published a letter on July 25th addressed to President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Bing Lee and Salman Dusty were among these signatories. They detailed the injuries they'd seen and noted their acute awareness that Gaza's medical professionals have been targeted. The doctors begged the president for an arms embargo and for unfettered aid delivery of antibiotics, painkillers and sutures. On August 1st, 300 days into the destruction of Gaza, Nermeen turned 21 in a white tent. She had been away from the hospital for a month. It was evacuated on July 1st. Patients left or were carried out by hand over a chaotic 24 hours. Nermeen said, "I'm impatiently waiting for the hospital to reopen because I miss helping and learning new things." While she heard the administrative work on reopening the hospital begun in mid-August, she doesn't know when it will reopen fully, and returning to the hospital might be dangerous. Sudden bombing could occur on the road, so instead she has returned to her studies when the intermittent at best internet allows, and when the terrifying noises of artillery shells pause long enough to let her focus. One day, Nermeen announced proudly that she'd managed to turn in her endocrinology exam online to a virtual classroom run by professors from a university that physically no longer exists. Nermeen said, "All of this losing makes my heart broken. I hope I can be strong because my dreams wait for me and many people. I want to help them."